My name is Margaret, and I'm 66 years old. For 5 years since my husband Benjamin passed away, I genuinely believed I'd been creating something meaningful with my family. I thought every dollar I spent, every sacrifice I made, every bit of love I poured into them was building relationships that actually mattered. Lord, was I wrong? You know what, Grandma? The best birthday gift you could possibly give me would be if you just kicked the bucket already, so we could finally get our hands on that money. Those words came out of my 17-year-old grandson Tyler's mouth, like he was commenting on the damn weather. He was sprawling across my kitchen chair, shoveling cereal into his face from a bowl that cost more than some folks make in a whole week. That spoon clinked against the fine china with each bite, and the sound echoed in my chest like a funeral bell tolling. I was standing right there at the stove, flipping his favorite blueberry pancakes. The batter was mixed to perfection, not a single lump. The griddle was heated to exactly the right temperature, just how he liked them. Steam was rising up, carrying that warm scent of vanilla and butter that usually made our kitchen feel like home. But right then, in that very moment, everything turned ice cold. My hand froze solid on that spatula. The pancake I'd been flipping fell back into the pan with this wet, ugly slap. I felt something inside me just crack wide open. Not like glass breaking all at once, but like ice slowly forming in my veins. For 66 years, I'd lived my whole life believing that family meant something real. That blood created bonds you couldn't just break. That love, genuine love, existed between people who shared your name and your history. What did you just say? I whispered, turning around real slow. Tyler didn't even bother looking up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, probably calculating exactly how much cash he'd inherit when I was 6 feet under. His dark hair fell across his forehead the same exact way Benjamin's used to fall. But there wasn't a single trace of Benjamin's warmth in those eyes. They were cold, calculating, predatory. Come on, Grandma. Don't act all shocked and offended, he said, still not looking at me. We all know you're getting pretty old. Mom and Dad are always going on and on about how much money we'll have once you're gone. You've had a good run and all. The casual cruelty of it knocked the breath right out of my lungs. This was the child I'd helped raise from when he was in diapers. The boy I'd taken to baseball games every weekend, bought expensive cleats for, paid for his fancy private school tuition when his parents claimed money was tight. I reached into my apron pocket real quiet, and felt that small digital recorder I always carried with me. It was a habit I'd picked up after Benjamin died, recording conversations with lawyers and doctors. Being a widow had taught me real quick to protect myself with evidence. My fingers found that record button and pressed it without making a sound. Tyler, honey, that's a terrible thing to say to someone. You don't really mean that, do you? He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his expression chilled me straight to the bone. Impatience. Like I was some slow waitress taking way too long to bring his order. Look, Grandma, let's just be real here for a second. You're 66 years old. You've been sick a whole lot lately. Mom keeps saying you're probably gonna need a nursing home pretty soon anyway, and that's just gonna eat up all the money like crazy. Wouldn't it be better for literally everyone if you just, went peacefully? Then me, Mom, and Dad could actually use the money for important stuff. I want to buy a Tesla when I turn 18 next week. Do you have any idea how much those things cost? I knew exactly how much they cost. $60,000. I knew because Tyler had been dropping hints about wanting one for months now, and I'd actually been seriously considering buying it for him as his 18th birthday gift. The irony made my stomach turn over. Important stuff, I repeated, my voice coming out hollow. And I suppose keeping your grandmother alive isn't important. He shrugged, and that gesture felt like a physical slap across my face. You've already lived your whole life, Grandma. I'm just getting started with mine. Besides, what are you even doing with all that money anyway? You just sit around this big old house all day. At least we'd do something fun with it. The pancakes were burning now. I could smell them, but I couldn't make myself move. I just stood there watching my grandson reduce my entire existence down to an inconvenient obstacle standing between him and a sports car. Your parents feel the same way about this? I asked quietly. Are you kidding me? Dad's been researching nursing homes for months now. He found this place down in Florida that only costs like $3,000 a month. Mom says once you're stuck there, you'll probably forget all about us anyway. So it'll be like a win-win situation for everybody. $3,000 a month. I was currently giving this family $8,000 every single month to cover their mortgage, car payments, credit cards, and Tyler's allowance. $8,000 from the life insurance money Benjamin had left me. I thought about Benjamin right then, about how he used to sit in that very chair where Tyler was sitting now, reading me the morning paper over coffee. Benjamin would bring me wildflowers from the garden and tell me I was still as beautiful as the day he married me. He would never have imagined that the grandson, who carried part of his name, would wish for his wife's death. Grandma, the pancakes are burning, Tyler's voice snapped me back. I turned off the burner and scraped those burnt pancakes into the garbage disposal. When I turned back around, Tyler was already gone. His empty bowl sat on the counter, and I could hear his car starting up outside. I stood there alone in my kitchen, surrounded by all the trappings of a life I'd thought was full of love. The expensive appliances, the dining table, the photographs, all over the refrigerator. But looking at those pictures with fresh eyes, I started seeing them differently. In every single photo, I was the one reaching out, smiling the biggest, giving the most. Everyone else was just going through the motions. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out this small leather journal where I'd been recording observations about my family. Patterns I'd noticed but kept dismissing. Comments that seemed cruel, but that I'd explained away as jokes. Now, reading back through my own handwriting, I saw the truth clearly. This wasn't a family. This was a business arrangement. And I was nothing but a cash cow everyone was waiting to slaughter. I picked up my pen and wrote, Tyler told me the best birthday gift I could give him would be my death, so they could split my money. He's 17 years old and he sees me as nothing more than an ATM with an expiration date. As I wrote those words, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, raw and painful. But it was being joined by something harder and colder. If my family saw me as nothing more than a source of money, then maybe it was time to show them what life looked like without that source. The digital recorder was still in my pocket, its red light blinking. Evidence of what my grandson really thought of me. The first piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. 3 days after Tyler's devastating comment, I made a discovery that changed absolutely everything. What I found that Thursday evening wasn't just proof of my family's greed. It was evidence of a calculated conspiracy that had been brewing right under my nose for God knows how long. I'd driven over to my daughter Rachel and her husband Derek's house to drop off some documents they needed for their mortgage refinancing. Documents I was helping them with because they claimed they couldn't afford the lawyer fees. The irony of that wasn't lost on me now, knowing they were simultaneously planning my demise so they could inherit money they thought I had sitting around. Their house was a modest 2-story colonial that I'd helped them buy 8 years ago with a $40,000 down payment straight from my savings. The mortgage payments, insurance, and most of their monthly bills came directly from my checking account every single month without fail. Standing on their front porch with an envelope full of financial paperwork, I realized I was literally holding evidence of how completely I'd supported this family for years. I rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. Rachel's car was sitting right there in the driveway, and I could see lights on in the living room, so I knew somebody was home. I tried knocking harder, then decided to use the spare key they'd given me years ago for emergencies. After all, I was practically paying for the damn house anyway. As I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Familiar voices, but speaking in tones I'd never heard before. Low, urgent, conspiratorial. Like they were planning a heist or something worse. My daughter Rachel, my son-in-law Derek, and unmistakably my grandson Tyler. I should have announced myself right then. I should have called out and let them know I was there. Instead, something made me freeze in place and just listen. Later, I'd realize it was pure survival instinct finally kicking in after years of willful blindness. The thing is, we need to be smart about this whole situation, Derek was saying. His voice carried that tone he used when discussing business deals, all calculated and cold. We can't just sit around hoping she dies naturally. She could live another 20 years easy, and by then there won't be anything left worth inheriting. Especially if she needs long-term care down the road. Exactly, Rachel added, and hearing my own daughter's voice made my heart stop. Do you know how much those places actually cost? We could lose absolutely everything we are counting on. My heart stopped beating. They were talking about me like I was some stock portfolio they needed to liquidate before it lost all its value. So what are you guys suggesting we do? Tyler asked, and I could hear the eagerness in his 17-year-old voice. The same voice that used to call me the best grandma in the whole world. I'm saying we need to encourage her to make some changes, Derek continued. Get her to move into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances anymore. I pressed myself flat against the wall, my hand covering my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively planning to have me declared incompetent so they could steal my money while I was still breathing. How do we do that? Rachel asked. She's sharp as a tack. Everyone who knows her can see that. Not everyone, Derek said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I've been documenting incidents. Little things. Times when she forgot something or seemed confused about dates. I've been building a file on her for months now. What kind of file? Tyler wanted to know. Medical records mostly. I found out that Dr. Peterson retired last year, so Mom's been seeing a new doctor who doesn't know her history at all. I've been going with her to appointments and guiding the conversation. Mentioning that we are concerned about her memory, her decision-making abilities. Planting seeds. My blood turned to absolute ice. Derek had been sabotaging my medical care, planting doubts about my mental capacity, with a doctor who didn't know me well enough to see through the manipulation. That's actually brilliant, Rachel breathed. How long before we can make it official? A few more months, maybe. The key is being gradual about it. We can't rush this process, or it'll look suspicious to everyone involved. What about the money? Tyler asked. How much are we really talking about here? I held my breath, waiting to hear their assessment of my net worth. Well, there's the house obviously. That's worth at least $500,000 now in this market, Derek said. Then there's the investment accounts, savings, the life insurance money from Benjamin. Last I checked, we are looking at close to $3 million total. $3 million. They thought I was worth $3 million. The truth was I had about $800,000 left. The rest, all of Benjamin's life insurance money and our retirement savings, everything we'd built over 44 years of marriage, had been spent on this family. Private school for Tyler, Rachel and Derek's mortgage, car payments, vacations, emergency expenses, medical bills, and countless other demands that had slowly drained my resources like water through a sieve. But I'd never told them how much I'd actually spent on them. I'd never wanted them to feel guilty about accepting my help. So they continued believing I was sitting on a fortune that simply didn't exist anymore. $3 million, Tyler whistled softly. That's enough for my Tesla, plus college, plus whatever I want after that. Don't forget we have expenses too, Rachel reminded him. Dad and I have been struggling to keep up with everything. This house, the cars, our credit cards. We need that money just as much as you do, Tyler. There's enough for everyone, Derek said diplomatically. The important thing is making sure we get control of it before she does something stupid with it. Like what? Rachel asked. Like giving it all to charity, or deciding to travel the world, or worse, getting remarried. You know how these lonely old women are. They are vulnerable to smooth-talking men who want to take advantage of them. The irony was absolutely staggering. They were worried about someone else taking advantage of me while they were actively plotting to do exactly that themselves. So what's our timeline? Tyler pressed. I'm thinking we start putting more pressure on her after your birthday next week, Derek said. We'll start suggesting that living alone isn't safe for someone her age. Maybe mention a few incidents where she seemed confused or forgetful. Get her used to the idea that she needs more help than she's been admitting to herself. And then? Rachel prompted. Then we help her choose a nice facility. Somewhere comfortable, but not too expensive. We want to preserve as much of the estate as possible for when the time comes. What if she refuses? Tyler asked. She won't have a choice if she's been declared incompetent, Derek explained patiently, like he was teaching a business seminar. Once we have power of attorney, we make all the decisions. Where she lives, how her money gets spent, everything. I'd heard enough. More than enough. I backed quietly toward the front door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I turned the key and slipped back outside into the cool evening air. Sitting in my car in their driveway, I stared at the house I'd helped them buy, processing what I'd just learned. This wasn't a family meeting about normal concerns for an aging relative. This was a calculated conspiracy to defraud me, to steal my independence, and to warehouse me in some cheap facility while they lived off the money I'd spent 44 years earning and saving. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the methodical, businesslike way they'd discussed destroying my life. There was no emotion in their voices, no guilt or hesitation whatsoever. They talked about having me declared incompetent the same way they might discuss refinancing a loan or choosing a vacation destination. As I drove home through the familiar streets, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The grief and shock from Tyler's comment were still there, but they were being joined by something harder and more dangerous. Clarity. Pure, crystal clear clarity. For the first time in years, I was seeing my family with absolute clarity. Not through the lens of love and hope and willful blindness, but with the sharp focus of someone who'd finally stopped making excuses for inexcusable behavior. They thought I was a naive old woman who could be easily manipulated. They thought I was so desperate for their love that I'd never question their motives or protect myself from their schemes. They were about to learn how wrong they were about everything. The morning after discovering my family's conspiracy, I woke up with this strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive or misinterpreting their behavior like some paranoid old lady. I'd heard the truth with my own 2 ears, recorded it on my digital device, and now I knew exactly where I stood with them. I wasn't their beloved grandmother and mother anymore. I was their mark. Their target. Their meal ticket. But what they didn't know was that their mark had been watching them a whole lot longer than they'd been watching me. While they thought they were being so clever with their little schemes, I'd been documenting their behavior in my journal for months. Every cruel comment dismissed as a joke, every financial demand justified as a temporary need, every manipulation disguised as concern for my welfare. I'd just been too afraid to believe what the evidence was telling me straight to my face. Now I was ready to conduct my own little test. I started with Rachel. My daughter called that Friday morning like she did every single week, supposedly to check on my well-being, but really to monitor my financial situation and make sure the money kept flowing. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Her voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something from me. "Actually, honey, I'm worried about something," I said, settling into Benjamin's old chair with my morning coffee. I had a meeting with my financial advisor yesterday, and he told me something pretty disturbing. I hadn't had any such meeting, of course, but I needed to see how quickly this news would travel through my family network like wildfire. "What kind of something?" Rachel's voice sharpened with interest immediately. "Well, you know how I've been helping you and Derek with the mortgage and other expenses every month." I paused, letting the question hang in the air between us. "Yeah. It turns out I may have been more generous than I should have been with my money. My advisor is concerned about my long-term financial security at this rate." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several long seconds. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. How much of a cutback are we talking about here? Not "are you okay?" or "what can we do to help you?" Just immediate concern about how this might affect their precious cash flow. He suggested I might need to reduce the monthly support I give you guys from $8,000 down to maybe $2,000. Just until I can get a better handle on my situation and see where I stand. $2,000. Rachel's voice pitched higher with panic. Mom, that won't even cover our mortgage payment. We're counting on that money every single month. Our whole budget depends on it. I know, sweetheart, and I'm really sorry about this. But I have to think about my own future too, you know. What if I need long-term care someday? Those facilities are so incredibly expensive these days. You don't need to worry about that, Rachel said quickly, way too quickly. If something happens to you, we'll take care of you ourselves. You don't need to hoard money for some nursing home that you might not even need. Hoard money. Like keeping enough to care for myself in my old age was some kind of character flaw or moral failing. I hope you're right, honey. But my advisor says I need to be more careful and realistic. He actually suggested I should consider downsizing this house. Maybe move into something smaller and more manageable for someone my age. Sell the house. Rachel's voice was sharp with alarm now. Mom, you can't do that. That house has so much sentimental value. Dad built that garden for you with his own hands. All your memories with him are there. Interesting how the sentimental value suddenly mattered so much when it might affect her inheritance down the line. I know it would be hard emotionally, I said sadly. But if I sold it, I could invest the money and have a steady income stream. Maybe even increase the support I'm able to give you and Tyler in the long run. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating whether a lump sum from the house sale might actually be better than monthly payments. Let me talk to Derek about this, she said finally. Maybe we can figure out some alternatives together. You shouldn't have to make any big decisions like this all alone, Mom. That's very sweet of you, dear. I was really hoping you'd say that. Family should stick together and help each other out, shouldn't we? After I hung up, I sat back and started the stopwatch function on my phone. I wanted to see exactly how long it would take for this fabricated financial crisis to make its way back to me through other family members. It took exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. Derek called first, his voice all smooth and concerned in that professional way he used with difficult clients. Margaret, Rachel mentioned you're having some financial concerns. I hope you don't mind, but I'd be happy to take a look at your portfolio. Sometimes these financial advisors try to scare older clients into making unnecessary changes that benefit them more than you. That's very thoughtful of you, Derek, but I'm not sure I'm ready to share all those personal details just yet. It feels very private and intimate, you know. Of course. But you know, if you're worried about long-term care costs, there might be some strategies we could explore together. Ways to protect your assets while still ensuring you get the care you need when the time comes. Protect my assets. He meant hide them so I could qualify for government assistance while preserving their inheritance. What kind of strategies? I asked innocently. Well, sometimes it makes sense to transfer assets to family members early on. That way they are not counted when determining eligibility for certain government programs. It's perfectly legal, and it ensures the money stays in the family where it belongs instead of going to some institution. Where it belongs. As if money I'd earned and saved somehow naturally belonged to them instead of me. That sounds pretty complicated, Derek. And wouldn't that mean I'd be giving up control of my own money? Not necessarily at all. We could set up a trust, make sure you still have access to what you need while protecting the rest for the future. I know some excellent lawyers who specialize in elder care planning. I could set up some meetings. I'll bet you do, I thought. Lawyers who'd help you steal my money legally. Let me think about it, I said. This is all very overwhelming for me right now. Of course, but Margaret, please don't make any major decisions without talking to us first, okay? We care about you so much, and we want to make sure you don't get taken advantage of by people who don't have your best interests at heart. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it right there. 2 hours later, Tyler called. My 17-year-old grandson, who'd wished for my death less than a week ago, was now suddenly concerned about my financial well-being. "Grandma, Mom told me you were having money problems. Is everything okay?" "I don't know if I'd call them problems exactly, sweetheart. I just need to be more careful about my spending going forward." "Does this mean you won't be able to give me the $50,000 for my birthday?" There it was. No preamble, no real concern for my situation whatsoever. Just a direct question about how this might affect his expected windfall. "I don't know yet, Tyler. $50,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we could find a smaller gift that would still make you happy." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "But you promised," he said finally, and I could hear the petulance in his voice like a spoiled child. "I've been counting on that money for months. I already picked out the car I want and everything." "I know, honey, and I'm sorry. But sometimes circumstances change, and we have to adapt. Maybe instead of a car, we could look at something more practical. A nice laptop for college or some new clothes." "A laptop?" His voice rose with pure indignation. "Grandma, everyone my age has a laptop already. I don't need another laptop. I need a car." "Need?" I repeated carefully. "Tyler, you already have a car. The Honda I bought you last year. That piece of junk." "It's embarrassing, Grandma. All my friends have nice cars. I can't pull up to college in a Honda Civic like some broke loser." The Honda Civic that had cost me $22,000, which he now dismissed as a piece of junk because it didn't properly display his status to his wealthy friends. "Honey, there are people your age who'd be grateful to have any car at all." "Yeah, well, I'm not other people. I'm your grandson. You're supposed to want good things for me." The entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. In his mind, my love was directly proportional to the amount of money I was willing to spend on him. "I do want good things for you," I said quietly. "But maybe we have different ideas about what good things actually means." "Whatever," he muttered. "I guess I'll have to figure something else out on my own." After he hung up on me, I sat in Benjamin's chair for a long time thinking about those 3 conversations. My fictional financial crisis had revealed everything I needed to know about my family's true feelings toward me. Not one of them had expressed genuine concern for my well-being. Not one had offered to help me through a difficult time. Their only worry was how my imaginary money problems might affect their access to my very real money. That evening, I called my real financial advisor, Martin Chen. Martin had been managing Benjamin's and my investments for 12 years, and he was one of the few people who knew the true state of my finances. "Margaret," he said warmly. "I haven't heard from you since our quarterly review last month. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, Martin, but I need to ask you about something important. If I wanted to make some significant changes to my estate planning, what would that process look like?" There was a pause. "What kind of changes are you considering?" "Let's say I wanted to remove my current beneficiaries and designate new ones. How quickly could that be done?" Another pause. "Is everything all right, Margaret?" "Everything is becoming very clear," I said. "Which is different from being all right, but it's definitely progress. Changes like that can be made relatively quickly if you're certain about them." "Are you certain?" I thought about Tyler's casual wish for my death. I thought about the conspiracy meeting I'd overheard. I thought about 3 phone calls today that had confirmed everything I'd feared. "I'm certain," I said firmly. "When can we meet?" "How about Monday morning?" 10 o'clock. "Perfect. And Martin, I want you to prepare several different options. I may be making some very substantial changes to everything." After I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. By Monday morning, I had made all the necessary appointments lined up like dominoes ready to fall. Martin Chen, my financial advisor. Robert Torres, my estate attorney. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist Martin had recommended. Each of them now had copies of my digital recordings, my journal entries, and a detailed timeline of my family's behavior over the past 6 months. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building an airtight case that nobody could punch holes through. The changes to my will were executed by Tuesday afternoon. The transfer of assets began on Wednesday morning. By Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd overheard that devastating conversation in my daughter's kitchen, everything was locked down tight as a drum. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of beautiful autumn day that makes you grateful to be alive. Tyler's 18th birthday. The day he expected to receive $50,000 and instead would learn what happens when you wish for your grandmother's death like it's some kind of birthday present. I'd invited the whole family over for dinner to celebrate Tyler's milestone birthday. Rachel had been absolutely thrilled by the invitation, probably thinking it meant I was feeling generous despite my supposed financial concerns. Derek had volunteered to pick up an expensive cake from that fancy bakery downtown. Tyler had been sullen but cooperative, no doubt expecting his Tesla down payment to materialize over dessert like magic. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, all fake smiles and false affection that made my stomach turn. Rachel brought flowers from the grocery store, chrysanthemums that had probably cost maybe $12. Derek carried that expensive cake like it was his generous contribution to the festivities instead of something he'd bought with money I'd given him. Tyler wore a new designer shirt that I'd probably paid for through his ridiculously high monthly allowance. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, embracing my grandson. He felt tense and stiff in my arms, impatient to get through all the pleasantries and get straight to the gift-giving portion of the evening. We made awkward small talk through dinner. Pot roast, Tyler's favorite, with mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden Benjamin and I had planted together all those years ago. The conversation was stilted and artificial as hell. Everyone was performing their role in this family charade, but the underlying tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, as I served up slices of that chocolate cake, Rachel brought up what they'd all been thinking about since they walked through the door. "So, Mom, how did your meeting with the financial advisor go this week? Are things looking any better than you thought?" "Actually," I said, cutting precise slices with careful movements, "things are looking much clearer now. I've made some really important decisions about my finances this week." Derek leaned forward with obvious interest. "What kind of decisions are we talking about?" I set down the knife and looked around the table at these 3 people who'd spent the last week plotting to steal my independence and my money. Who'd been planning it for months, maybe years. Well, I realized that Martin, that's my advisor, was absolutely right about one thing. I have been far too careless with my money for way too long. "We told you we'd help you figure out a better plan," Rachel said quickly, too quickly. "You don't have to handle all this alone, Mom." "That's very generous of you," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "But I've already handled it. I've made some significant changes to protect my assets and ensure my long-term security." Tyler finally looked up from his cake, a flicker of worry crossing his face for the first time. "What kind of changes?" "Well, first I've moved most of my liquid assets into a protected trust that can only be accessed for my medical care and daily living expenses. It's completely protected now from anyone who might try to take advantage of me." The silence that fell over that table was absolutely deafening. I continued cutting cake, as if I were just discussing the weather outside. "I've also made arrangements for my ongoing care if I ever need it. If I become unable to manage my own affairs, there's a professional guardian service that will step in immediately. I'll never have to worry about being taken advantage of by people who might not actually have my best interests at heart." Derek's fork clattered against his plate. "Margaret, that seems a bit extreme, don't you think? Family should take care of family when the time comes." "I couldn't agree more," I said, meeting his eyes directly without blinking. "Family should absolutely take care of family. They should protect each other. They should never, ever conspire to steal from each other or plot to have each other declared incompetent." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Rachel's face went pale as a ghost. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out my small digital recorder. I set it right there on the table next to the birthday cake, its silver surface gleaming in the chandelier light above us. I'm talking about the conversation you had last Thursday evening. The one where you discussed having me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my money. The one where you planned to warehouse me in some cheap facility while you lived off my life savings like parasites. Tyler's mouth fell open. Derek started to speak, but I held up my hand firmly. Please let me finish. I've been very patient listening to all of you scheme and plot behind my back. Now it's your turn to listen to me. I pressed the play button on the recorder. Derek's voice filled my dining room, crystal clear and utterly damning. I'm saying we need to encourage her to make some changes. Get her to move into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances. I let it play for 30 long seconds before hitting stop. The silence that followed was absolutely crushing. 27 minutes, I said conversationally, like I was discussing a TV show. That's how long you spent discussing the best way to destroy my life. Very thorough, very detailed, very carefully recorded. Rachel was staring at the device like it was a poisonous snake about to strike. Mom, you don't understand at all. We were just worried about you. Worried about me? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to make them all physically flinch. Let me play another part for you. I fast-forwarded to Tyler's voice. 3 million. That's enough for my Tesla plus college plus whatever I want after that. Tyler went white as a sheet. Grandma, I didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean it, I interrupted firmly. Just like you meant it when you told me the best birthday gift I could give you would be my death, so you could split the money. Yes, I recorded that conversation too. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it beside the recorder with a soft thud. This contains copies of all my recordings, my journal entries documenting your behavior over the past year, and statements from 3 different medical professionals confirming that I am of completely sound mind. It also contains copies of the new legal documents I've executed this week. Derek found his voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. What kind of legal documents? A new will, for starters. The old one left everything to Rachel and Tyler. This one has completely different beneficiaries. Who? Rachel's voice was barely audible. The American Cancer Society, the local food bank, the children's hospital where I used to volunteer before you started demanding all my time and money. Organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them for personal gain. Tyler shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. You can't do that. That money is supposed to be ours. Actually, I said, still sitting calmly with my hands folded, that money is mine. I earned it with Benjamin over 44 years of hard work. I saved it. And I can leave it to whoever I choose. But we're your family, Rachel's voice cracked with desperation and fake tears. Are you? I asked quietly. Because family members don't usually conspire to steal from each other. Family members don't wish for each other's deaths. Family members don't plot to have their elderly relatives declared incompetent and locked away in the cheapest facility they can find. We would never have actually gone through with it, Derek said quickly, desperately. We were just discussing options and possibilities. For 27 minutes in great detail, I replied calmly. Including specific timelines and methods. Would you like me to play the part where you discussed which nursing homes would be cheapest to dump me in? This is insane, Tyler said, his voice rising with anger. You're punishing us for having a private conversation. A private conversation about destroying my life and stealing my money, I shot back. Yes, I suppose I am punishing you for that. And I don't feel even a little bit guilty about it. I stood up slowly, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos erupting around me like a storm. There's more, I said. I've also made arrangements for my monthly financial support to end immediately. The $8,000 I've been giving you each month. That stops today. Right now. Rachel gasped like I'd physically struck her. Mom, we can't afford. You'll figure it out, I said firmly. After all, you're both capable adults with jobs. You managed before I started helping you, and you can manage again. You're destroying this family, Derek accused, his professional composure finally cracking completely. No, I said firmly. You destroyed this family when you decided to see me as nothing more than a source of money. When you taught your son that his grandmother's death would be a birthday gift. I walked to the door and opened it wide. I think it's time for you to leave now. Take your cake with you. They filed out in stunned silence, Derek carrying that expensive cake like a prop from a play that had ended badly. Rachel paused at the door, tears streaming down her face. Mom, this isn't how families are supposed to work. You're absolutely right, I said quietly. Families are supposed to love and protect each other. They are supposed to treasure the time they have together. I started to close the door, then paused. Happy birthday, Tyler. I hope you got everything you deserved tonight. As their car pulled out of my driveway, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted but strangely free. It was done. After 66 years of believing that family was everything, I'd finally learned to put myself first. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. Saturday and Sunday passed in blissful quiet. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no manipulative text messages begging for forgiveness or money. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning without the weight of their expectations crushing down on my chest like a boulder. I made coffee for one, read the newspaper without interruption, and tended Benjamin's garden without anyone commenting on how I was overdoing it for someone my age. It was the most peaceful weekend I'd had since Benjamin died 5 years ago. But Monday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting all along. The first call came at 7:15 while I was watering the roses. Rachel's number flashed across my phone screen, and I let it go straight to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later, then another, then another. By 8 o'clock, she'd called 12 times in a row. I finally answered on the 13th ring. Mom, thank God. Her voice was frantic, desperate, pathetic. We need to talk. This whole thing is just a big misunderstanding. What part is the misunderstanding? I asked, settling into Benjamin's chair with my coffee. The part where you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent, or the part where you wanted to steal my money? We weren't going to steal anything, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. Real or fake, I couldn't tell anymore. We were trying to protect you from yourself. Protect me from what exactly? Having control over my own life and money. Mom, you don't understand how vulnerable you are. There are people out there who prey on elderly women just like you. The irony was so thick I almost laughed out loud. You mean people like you and Derek? After I hung up, I made myself a second cup of coffee and sat down to check my voicemails. There were 17 of them waiting. Rachel pleading and crying. Derek trying to sound reasonable and professional. Tyler surprisingly saying nothing at all, which was probably the most honest response. But it was the 18th message that caught my attention. A voice I didn't recognize at all. Mrs. Margaret Patterson, this is Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services. We've received some concerning reports about your welfare, and we'd like to schedule a wellness check at your earliest convenience. My blood ran cold. They hadn't wasted any time at all. I immediately called Martin Chen. Margaret, he said, answering on the first ring. I've been expecting your call this morning. You've gotten some interesting visitors, haven't you? Because they called me first, Martin said. Your son-in-law wanted to know if there was any way to contest the changes you made to your estate. He seemed very concerned about your mental state, kept asking questions. And what did you tell him? I told him that I've been working with you for 12 years, that you're as sharp as ever, and that any attempts to question your competency would be met with the full documentation we've prepared. Including those recordings. What about this elder care advocacy thing? Standard procedure, when someone files a concern report about an elderly person. Don't worry at all. Dr. Williams is expecting their call. She's prepared to conduct any competency evaluation they might request. 3 days later, there were 3 cars parked in my driveway when I got home from the grocery store. Rachel's Honda, Derek's BMW, and a small silver sedan I didn't recognize at all. Through my living room window, I could see people sitting on my front porch waiting for me like vultures. I parked in the garage and tried to enter through the kitchen, hoping to avoid the confrontation. But before I could even set down my purse, the doorbell rang and wouldn't stop. Finally, I opened the door to find not just my family, but a well-dressed woman in her 40s carrying a clipboard and wearing that professionally sympathetic expression that social workers perfected in training. Mrs. Patterson, I'm Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services. These are your family members, I believe. Unfortunately, I said coldly. We are here to conduct a welfare check. Your family has expressed some concerns about your recent behavior and decision-making capacity. I looked past her to where Rachel, Derek, and Tyler stood clustered together like conspirators caught in the act. Rachel's eyes were red from crying. Derek looked like he was trying to solve a complex business problem. Tyler just looked sullen and angry as usual. What kind of concerns? I asked Amanda Morrison directly. They've reported that you've been making erratic financial decisions, that you've become paranoid and suspicious of family members who are trying to help you, and that you may be suffering from some form of dementia or cognitive decline. I stepped back and opened the door wider. Please come in, all of you. We assembled in my living room like opposing armies preparing for battle. Amanda Morrison sat in the center with her clipboard while my family arranged themselves on the couch. I settled in Harold's chair with my hands folded calmly in my lap. Mrs. Patterson, Amanda began carefully, your family is concerned that you've recently made some significant changes to your estate planning. Can you tell me about that? Certainly, I said calmly. I discovered that my family was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my money and put me in a nursing home. So I took steps to protect myself from them. Amanda's pen paused over her clipboard. That's a very serious accusation to make. Yes, it is. Would you like to hear the recordings I have? I reached for my purse, but Derek interrupted quickly. See? This is exactly what we are talking about. She's become obsessed with these supposed recordings. She thinks we are all plotting against her like some paranoid conspiracy theorist. I don't think you're plotting against me, I said calmly. I know you are because I heard you doing it with my own ears. I pulled out my digital recorder and set it on the coffee table between us. Ms. Morrison, would you like to hear exactly what my family said about me when they thought I couldn't hear them? Amanda looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson, I'm not sure that's... Please, I interrupted firmly. I absolutely insist. After all, they're the ones who called you here because they are so concerned about my mental state. I think you should hear what they really think about me. I pressed play and Derek's voice filled my living room like a ghost. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney. Claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances. Amanda's eyes widened in shock. By the time I reached Tyler's voice discussing how much money he'd inherit when I died, the room was completely silent except for the damning evidence of their conspiracy playing out for everyone to hear. Amanda Morrison looked from the recorder to my family and back to me with obvious disbelief. Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been aware of these discussions? I've been documenting concerning behavior for months, I said. But I overheard this particular conversation last Thursday evening. Amanda turned to Rachel. Is this recording accurate? Rachel's face was bright red with embarrassment and anger. It's taken completely out of context. We were just discussing what would happen if Mom needed care someday. Do most families discuss having elderly relatives declared incompetent? Amanda asked pointedly. After 20 more minutes of questions, Amanda closed her clipboard and stood up. Mrs. Patterson, based on this interview, I see no evidence of cognitive decline or impaired decision-making. You appear to be a competent adult who has made rational choices to protect yourself. This is ridiculous. Rachel shot to her feet. I'm going to take the evidence, Amanda said firmly. Mrs. Patterson, Would you like me to file a report about these threats? I looked at them, frightened and desperate now. No. I just want them to leave me alone. After everyone left, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness, but from pure relief. The worst was over. 7 months later, I was standing in my new kitchen making coffee for two. The morning sun streamed through windows that faced east instead of west, illuminating a space that was smaller, but somehow felt infinitely larger than the house I'd left behind. I'd sold the family home 3 weeks after the confrontation. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed the freedom. Every single room in that house had been haunted by memories of people who'd never really loved me, and ghosts of the woman I used to be. The one who'd confused financial support with actual love. My new home was a charming 2-bedroom cottage in a retirement community called Sunrise Gardens. It wasn't one of those sterile institutional places my family had researched for me. Instead, it was a vibrant neighborhood of independent seniors who'd chosen to live near each other for companionship and security, not because they needed constant care. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock like it did every Tuesday morning. "Good morning, sunshine," called Ellen Foster, as she let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. Ellen was 72, a retired teacher, who lived 3 houses down, and had become my closest friend in this new life I'd built for myself. "Morning, Ellen," I called back, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs I'd bought at a local pottery shop. "Ready for our adventure today?" We'd started taking day trips together 6 weeks after I moved in. Today we were driving to a small town 90 minutes away that was famous for its antique shops and farmers market. Simple pleasures, but they felt absolutely revolutionary after years of scheduling my entire life around other people's constant demands. "Did you see the article in this morning's paper?" Ellen asked, settling at my kitchen table with her coffee. She pulled out a folded newspaper and pointed to a small item in the local section. "Tyler Patterson, 18, arrested for drunk driving. Vehicle impounded." The article was only 3 sentences long, but it told a complete story about consequences and choices. I felt absolutely nothing. No urge to call and offer help. No guilt about not being there to bail him out. No responsibility whatsoever for cleaning up the mess he'd made. "You okay?" Ellen asked gently. She knew my whole history, knew why I'd moved here, and cut contact with my family completely. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. It had taken real time to reach this point. The first month after the confrontation had been difficult, filled with moments when I'd almost picked up the phone to call Rachel, when I'd caught myself setting the table for 4 people instead of 1. 66 years of programmed responses don't disappear overnight like magic. But gradually, the silence had stopped feeling empty and started feeling peaceful instead. The absence of constant crisis had stopped feeling strange and started feeling beautifully normal. The freedom to make my own choices without considering everyone else's reactions had stopped feeling selfish and started feeling incredibly healthy. "Any word from your daughter lately?" Ellen asked as we got ready to leave. "She stopped calling about 2 months ago," I said, gathering my purse and jacket. "I think she finally realized I wasn't going to change my mind or send more money." There had been a few desperate attempts at reconciliation early on. Rachel had sent a birthday card in January for my 67th birthday with a long letter claiming she understood now how wrong they'd been, how much they missed me, how they'd learned their lesson about respecting me. But the letter had been absolutely full of subtle hints about their financial struggles, carefully worded suggestions that maybe I could help just a little bit while they got back on their feet. I'd thrown it away without responding. Derek had tried a more direct approach, showing up at my old house before realizing I'd sold it and moved. The new owners had given him my lawyer's contact information, and Robert Torres had informed him that any further attempts to contact me would be considered harassment and potentially legal action. Tyler had done absolutely nothing. No calls, no letters, no attempts at apology whatsoever. In a strange way, his complete silence was the most honest response of all. He'd never really known me as a person, only as a source of money. Without that function, I simply didn't exist for him anymore. And that was perfectly fine with me. Ellen and I drove through the countryside, past farms and forests that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. She told me about her grandchildren, real grandchildren, who called her because they wanted to hear her voice, not because they needed money. Children who visited because they genuinely enjoyed her company. You know what I realized? I said as we pulled into the farmer's market parking lot. I spent so many years mourning the family I thought I had that I never allowed myself to build the life I actually wanted for myself. And what did you want? Ellen asked thoughtfully. I thought about it as we walked among the vendor booths, past displays of fresh vegetables and homemade preserves and handcrafted jewelry. I wanted to matter to someone. Not because of what I could give them or buy them, but because of who I actually was as a person. And do you matter to someone now? I looked around at the bustling market, at the vendors who knew my name and asked about my week, at the other customers who'd become casual friends, at Ellen who'd invited me to join her book club and walking group. Yes, I said honestly. I matter to me, and that turns out to be more than enough. We spent the morning browsing through antique shops, not looking for anything particular, but enjoying the stories behind old photographs and vintage jewelry. I bought a small wooden box that had once held someone's treasured letters, thinking I might use it to store the journal entries I'd been writing about this new chapter. Over lunch at a small cafe, Ellen asked the question I'd been expecting for months. Do you ever regret it? Cutting them off completely like that. I considered this carefully while I ate my soup. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I regret that I spent so many years making excuses for inexcusable behavior. I paused, then added firmly, but I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret choosing my own well-being over their convenience. And I don't regret discovering what my life could be like when it's actually mine. That evening, as I sat in my new favorite chair reading a book I'd chosen for pure pleasure, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the community center. Margaret, this is Nancy. We are still looking for someone to coordinate our holiday gift drive for the local women's shelter. Are you interested? The gift drive would involve organizing donations and helping women who were starting over after leaving dangerous situations. Women who, like me, had discovered that sometimes walking away from family was the bravest thing you could do. I'd love to help, I said without hesitation. I had no idea what my family was doing for the holidays. I didn't know if Tyler had learned anything from his arrest, or if Rachel and Derek had figured out how to manage without my monthly contributions. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't care even a little bit. I was 67 years old, and I was finally living for myself. Standing in my own kitchen in my own house, surrounded by my own choices, I thought about Tyler's cruel comment that had started this whole journey 7 months ago. The best birthday gift you could give me would be if you just died already, so we could finally split the money. In a strange way, he'd been absolutely right about one thing. The woman who'd lived to serve their needs, who'd confused love with financial support, who'd accepted scraps of affection in exchange for constant giving, that woman had died. And what had risen from her ashes was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable to herself. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the call that changed everything one last time. I was in my garden, planting bulbs that would bloom next spring, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Patterson. This is Detective Sarah Chen from the County Police Department. I'm calling about your grandson, Tyler Patterson. My heart stopped for just a second. Is he okay? He's physically fine, but he's been arrested again. This time for attempted fraud. He tried to forge your signature on documents claiming you'd signed over power of attorney to his parents. He brought these documents to your bank trying to access your accounts. I sat down heavily on my garden bench. When did this happen? Yesterday afternoon. The bank manager recognized the forgery immediately and called us. Tyler and both his parents are currently in custody. They are claiming you're mentally incompetent, and that they have the right to manage your finances. I see, I said calmly. What do you need from me, detective? We need you to come down to the station and make a formal statement. We also need to verify your mental competency, which I understand you've already had evaluated recently. Yes, I have complete documentation from 3 different medical professionals. I'll bring everything with me. After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time. Part of me felt sad that it had come to this, that they'd gotten so desperate they'd actually broken the law. But another part of me, the stronger part, felt nothing but relief that this chapter was finally closing for good. At the police station 2 hours later, I sat across from Detective Chen and laid out everything. The recordings, the journal entries, the medical evaluations, the timeline of their conspiracy. She listened without interrupting, taking careful notes. Mrs. Patterson, this is one of the most well-documented cases of elder financial abuse I've ever seen, she said finally. With your permission, we'd like to press full charges against all 3 of them. I thought about Rachel, the little girl I'd raised. I thought about Derek, who I'd welcomed into our family. I thought about Tyler, who I'd loved since the day he was born. Then I thought about the woman I used to be, who would have made excuses for them, bailed them out, forgiven them without them ever changing. Yes, I said firmly. Press charges. All of them. The trial took 3 months. I attended every single day, sitting in the front row watching them squirm. Rachel cried constantly, playing the victim. Derek tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. Tyler just looked angry, like the world owed him something it wasn't delivering. The prosecutor used my recordings as the centerpiece of the case. The jury heard Derek's voice plotting to have me declared incompetent. They heard Rachel discussing which nursing home would be cheapest. They heard Tyler wishing for my death, so he could buy a Tesla. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Derek got 18 months for conspiracy and attempted fraud. Rachel got 12 months plus probation. Tyler, as a legal adult now, got 6 months plus community service and mandatory counseling. When the judge read the sentences, Rachel turned around in her seat and looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. Like I was the one who'd betrayed her instead of the other way around. I looked right back at her without flinching. Without apologizing. Without feeling anything except relief that it was finally over. After the trial ended, I walked out of that courthouse into the sunshine and felt lighter than I had in decades. Ellen was waiting for me in the parking lot with a bottle of champagne and 2 plastic cups. To freedom, she said, pouring us each a generous amount. To finally learning that the most important relationship you can have is the one you have with yourself, I replied. We clinked our plastic cups together and drank right there in the courthouse parking lot like a couple of rebels. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my cottage. Ellen and 3 other friends from the community, women who'd become more like family to me in 7 months than my actual family had been in 66 years. We ate pasta and salad and laughed about silly things. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody treated me like an ATM or a burden. Nobody wished I was dead so they could inherit my savings. They just enjoyed my company because they genuinely liked me as a person. After everyone left, I sat in my favorite chair and pulled out my journal. I'd filled 3 notebooks since that morning Tyler had wished for my death over breakfast. 3 notebooks documenting my journey from victim to survivor to someone who'd finally learned her own worth. I wrote my final entry about the trial, about the verdict, about how it felt to finally be completely free. Then I wrote something else, something I wanted to remember forever. Today I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. Family is about people who choose you and who you choose back. Family is about mutual respect and genuine love, and wanting what's best for each other without keeping score. I spent 66 years believing I had a family. Now I know I was wrong. But I also know that at 67, I finally found one. I found it in Ellen's laughter and Nance's kindness, and the book club ladies who argue about plot twists over wine. I found it in the quiet mornings in my cottage, and the freedom to make my own choices, and the peace that comes from knowing your worth isn't tied to your bank account. Most importantly, I found family in the woman I see in the mirror now. The one who learned to protect herself. The one who refused to be a victim. The one who chose herself when everyone else chose her money. That woman is my family now. And she's more than enough. I closed the journal and looked around my small cottage. It wasn't as big as the house I'd shared with Benjamin. It didn't have as many memories or as much history. But it was mine, completely and totally mine, and that made it worth more than anything I'd left behind. Tomorrow I'd start coordinating the holiday gift drive. Next week I'd take another day trip with Ellen. Next month I'd host Thanksgiving for my real family, the one I'd chosen. And someday, when my time actually came, I'd leave everything to the charities that helped people instead of exploited them. I'd leave a legacy of kindness instead of enabling cruelty. But most importantly, I'd leave knowing I'd spent the last chapter of my life living for myself instead of dying slowly for people who never really loved me. Standing at my window watching the sun set over my garden, I raised my coffee mug in a quiet toast. Happy birthday to me, I whispered to the empty room that felt fuller than any crowded family gathering ever had. And somewhere, I was absolutely certain Benjamin was smiling. 1 year and 3 months after Tyler wished for my death over breakfast, I found myself standing in front of a room full of women at the community center. They'd asked me to speak at their monthly meeting about financial independence and protecting yourself from exploitation, even when it comes from family. I was 68 years old now, and I'd never felt more alive or more certain of who I was. My grandson told me the best birthday gift I could give him would be my death, I began, watching their faces shift from polite attention to genuine shock. He was 17 years old, sitting in my kitchen, eating cereal from a bowl I'd bought him, and he wished me dead so he could buy a Tesla with my inheritance. I told them everything. The conspiracy I'd overheard. The recordings I'd made. The way I'd tested them and watched them fail spectacularly. The confrontation at Tyler's birthday dinner. The trial that had ended with all 3 of them convicted. But I also told them about the peace I'd found afterward. The friendships I'd built. The life I'd created for myself when I finally stopped living for other people's expectations. The hardest thing I ever did was choose myself over my family, I said. But it was also the most important thing I ever did. Because it taught me that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just exploitation with a prettier name. After I finished speaking, a woman in her 70s approached me with tears streaming down her face. My son keeps asking me for money, she whispered. He says he'll pay me back, but he never does. He says if I really loved him, I'd help him. And I feel so guilty every time I think about saying no. I took her hands in mine and looked her straight in the eyes. Saying no doesn't mean you don't love him. It means you love yourself enough to set boundaries. And anyone who tries to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself doesn't actually love you. They love what you can give them. She hugged me tight, and I felt her shoulders shake with sobs she'd probably been holding in for years. Over the next few months, I started speaking regularly at different community centers and senior groups. My story resonated with so many people who'd been quietly suffering, convinced that family loyalty meant accepting abuse and exploitation without complaint. I became a volunteer advocate for elder financial abuse victims, helping them document evidence and build cases. I worked with lawyers and social workers and police detectives. I helped dozens of people find the courage to protect themselves from the people who were supposed to love them most. And every single time I helped someone escape that trap, I thought about Benjamin and how proud he would have been of the woman I'd become. Ellen and I took more trips together. We visited art museums and attended concerts and spent long afternoons at cafes arguing about books we'd read. We celebrated birthdays and holidays with our chosen family, the community we'd built together. I never heard from Rachel, Derek, or Tyler again after the trial ended. They served their sentences and disappeared from my life completely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Rachel had gotten divorced, that Derek had lost his job, that Tyler had dropped out of college. Part of me, a very small part, felt sad about how their lives had turned out. But the larger part, the stronger part, knew that consequences were necessary. That actions had to have repercussions. That you couldn't spend your whole life taking advantage of people without eventually paying the price. On what would have been Benjamin's 75th birthday, I visited his grave and told him everything that had happened since we'd last talked. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years," I said to the quiet air around his headstone. "You always said that the people who truly love you will never make you feel small. They'll never make you question your worth. They'll never see you as a means to an end." The wind rustled through the oak tree above his grave, and I imagined it was his way of agreeing with me. "I miss you every single day," I continued. "But I'm okay now. Better than okay, actually. I'm happy. I'm free. I'm surrounded by people who actually care about me as a person instead of as a bank account. And I finally learned to care about myself too." I placed fresh flowers on his grave, the wildflowers he used to pick for me from our garden. "Thank you for loving me the right way," I whispered. "For showing me what real love looks like so I could recognize the counterfeit version when it was all I had left." Walking back to my car, I felt a sense of completion wash over me. The story that had started with Tyler's cruel words over breakfast had finally reached its proper ending. Not the ending they'd wanted, where I died conveniently and left them everything. But the ending I'd chosen, where I lived fully and left them with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. That evening, I sat down at my computer and started writing everything down. The whole story from beginning to end. Not for them, but for other people who might be going through the same thing. People who needed to know it was okay to choose themselves. That it was okay to walk away from toxic family members. That survival sometimes meant cutting off the people who were supposed to love you most. As I typed the final words, I realized something profound. Tyler had been right after all, just not in the way he'd meant. My death, the death of the woman who'd existed only to serve others, had been the best gift I could have given myself. Because it made room for someone new to be born. Someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who refused to be diminished, or exploited or taken for granted ever again. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, I was exactly who I wanted to be. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story all the way to the end. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar with your own family? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts, because these conversations matter more than you might think. And if my story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about family and love and knowing your worth, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because I've got more stories to share, more truths to tell, and more lessons I learned the hard way, so maybe you won't have to. Thank you for being here with me through this whole journey. Thank you for listening without judgment. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who are supposed to matter most. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember this: you are worth more than what you can give to other people. You are valuable just by existing. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise doesn't deserve a place in your life, family or not. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself.